When I was around 10 years old, I worried about what was normal for me at that age: mortality. I'd made the connection that everybody dies, leaving us here on Earth without those elders to guide us. That was how it seemed to me then, anyway. I started having nightmares about the life I'm currently living 30 years later. Both Dad's parents have died, and the family home is no longer in the family. The home where Nono gardened and then canned the pasta sauce and antipasti before sending it to us on the Greyhound bus or brought to us in the Cutlass when we still lived in Alberta. It was the time of Cutlasses. It took a long time to unpack their car when they got to our house about 9 hours away. In winter, my mom used to say, "Ugh, this place is bleak as Russia. Nothing grows here. Look at the skinny trees." This was when the season was getting long in the tooth for us, having been in BC longer than Alberta. "Edmonton is on the same latitude as Moscow, you know," she always added, as though that was some great comparison. "How will we eat without Nono's garden if he died? We can't grow a garden here. We don't have one of our own. What would we do?" I asked as Dad was getting sawdust out of the radial arm saw. He shook his head at the notion, waving his hand at me in the doorway. I lingered there, knowing I was not to go into the garage when the power tools were in use or when Dad was leaned over our Cutlass, its hood up like a gargantuan alligator mouth with a large light hooked into it, illuminating some great viscous mystery just beyond my sight. As an adult today, older than my father would have been at the time of this event, I understand this quick knee-jerk, "Oh, don't be silly, you worry too much" reaction. Dad's parents were tough but healthy people, and there was no need to worry about their demise back then. Yet somehow, in some way, the light rolling in from our idyllic cul-de-sac of brand new houses made visible my loss of sleep due to worry. He stopped his work. "You head in. I'm right behind you," he said. Not sure if he meant he'd be in once his work was done or straight away. I went back to my spot next to the gas fireplace, parking myself on the Berber carpet with my island of art supplies around me. Before I could go back to entertaining myself with drawing and a cheap laugh at Cousin Larry and Balky, or Danny, Joey, and Uncle Jesse, or Urkel, he asked me over to him on the couch. He hugged me, which caught me off guard. I leaned in, surprised at how rarely there was physical contact between me and either of my parents, which added to my emotion. He had on one of his favorite t-shirts. It was the powder blue one with a radial engine on the front, with the slogan, "Real airplanes have round engines." He had a Kleenex for me when I lifted my head from the shirt, now turning dark blue from my tears. I was focusing on restraining my crying because I didn't want him to get mad. Usually crying elicited anger from my parents. But he wasn't angry this time. He felt my trembling shoulders as I gasped each breath, still worried I could induce anger, and he hugged me tighter. He waited for me to wipe my eyes and nose without pressure to "Hurry up, we haven't got all day." Calmer now, I was eager for the secret everyone else apparently had tucked away inside them, except me. I needed to know desperately, because something made amply clear to me at that time was the war in the Gulf. I already knew about Nono and how he'd been nearly killed by starvation and heavy bombings of the German labor camp where he'd been imprisoned. I was more aware than most other 10-year-olds I went to school with that wars always involve indiscriminate killing. Any people die, not just soldiers. Kids like me and my sister. People like Mom and Dad could die under those circumstances, and I believed it was my responsibility to have everything figured out when it came to taking care of my younger sister. It was my one job, or so I thought. I was that kid who checked the house for fire hazards before bed. I knew several escape routes from the house if the doors were blocked. I had a strong sense of responsibility for our home and my sister because I'd been told all through Mom's pregnancy, "You're the big sister now, and we'll need your help when the baby gets here." I'd heard Nono's quiet after dinner talks with chilled glasses and grappa or whiskey or brandy. The stories he never told during the daylight came out. You know, the stories so many veterans come home with, regardless of the war. "It was me and a few other guys on the dark," he said, the use of on instead of in the dark because of his accent. "We still had the sergeant. He kept us alive through carpet bombings. He was a good sergeant. On the dark, we were running and running, but I fall down," he said, the verb tense changing as he got to the hard part. I was so young as I heard this, I assumed he meant he just tripped over a rock or some depression in the land caused him to lose footing. But I also would have been 6 or 7, and it was the 1980s. I didn't understand the reason he was repeatedly falling was because of aerial attack. He couldn't use a light source or he'd give himself away. He always looked down into his warmed over snifter, empty after a couple shots, but still in his massive hands, seeing what he would have been falling over in 1943 when the sun rose on it. Unable to stop some nights, it had to escape his lips. A whole village gone from the bombs. I fell over all those women holding their babies, just dead. His face always made that strange contortion of outrage and deep sorrow all at once, something a university professor said the Greeks call penthos. His hands clenched that snifter tighter. Anne Frank was only 5 years older than I would have been during the Gulf War, when her life was lost. I'd read her diary. I'd seen the green and black FLIR night vision imagery on the news. This was no round of space invaders on my Atari 2600, though. I knew this was actual life and death. When I could breathe again, Dad told me something I'd never heard before. "Well, Bunny," a pet name he used with both me and my sister. "Well, Bunny, there's not much point to living if you're always thinking about dying. You're right. Someday everybody dies. But your Nono is healthy. He'll be around for a long time yet. Don't you worry." I knew this was a considered response because he'd been sitting with me for longer than usual, allowing me to be afraid and perhaps understanding for the first time just how genuinely concerned I was and how I'd been holding it in while still trying to memorize multiplication tables that refused to stick. I'd like to think my struggle to keep up in math class made more sense after that, but I don't know. For that brief time between us, it felt like my dad, who could build anything like the woodshed, which he designed to be a miniature version of our house, or repair the roof, or overhaul all those carburetors and radial engines on a DC-6, could also understand one of my problems. Looking back, I realize he was using imperial tools when it was a metric application, but he saw me in the ditch and stopped to help. Not unlike the time we drove past each other and he noticed my beetle lurching around strangely. It was on Peardenville, heading to the ferry in Tawasin. I was moving to Vancouver Island for college. He turned his pickup around, seeing I'd stopped for him. "What's going on here?" he asked. "It's acting very strangely all of a sudden," I said, shutting the engine off. He threw the very hot back lid open and waited for it to cool a bit. Looking forward to school? I'm nervous, but I think it'll be okay, I answered. I can see the problem from here, he said, grabbing a loose distributor lead, looking into it as though it was a tiny water hose. I imagined it squirting oil or something at him as if we were in a Looney Tunes short. The teeth are not great in there, he said, turning the lead to me and taking another one off another cylinder for me to see what it should look like. When you get to the island, you'll need that replaced. Shouldn't be expensive, though. For now, it'll stay on, I figure. "'Kay, give it a try," he said. The car came back to life with that lawnmower sound, and he closed the lid. He gave me the victory sign with his hand, smiling through the rear window. His face was obscured by the rear defrost lines. I stirred up dust on the shoulder as I gave it some gas. He waved again and got back in his truck, heading the other direction. I don't know where he was going that day, more than 20 years ago. He didn't usually leave work in the middle of the day like that. But there he was on the road, and I needed him. It reminds me of how, when we left the family home in the Kootenays where Dad grew up, we used to take the mountain up to Fruitvale, heading to Montrose and Castlegar, and I would watch Nona in her housecoat standing in the carport waving at us as we took that turn onto the highway and started that long climb, loaded up with all sorts of her food. She always stood there until the road whipped us out of sight, and she'd go back in for more coffee, back in that time of Cutlasses. I've been Danielle Walker. It's nice to see ya.